after reading the pre-read, I wanted to share something with all of you. And some of the thoughts that came to mind for me after I read that. One thing I went to really quickly, I saw the word undocumented immigrants. And my first thought process was, how do you create equity for someone who's illegal? How do you do that? And then I said, well, and even if you were able to help them with some type of education, can they go to work? And so I didn't, my feelings, I thought initially were these negative feelings about that. And then I said, this is odd for me to have this thought process in my head, because I'm a minority, a woman and African American. I grew up in poverty, and I'm always like, I'm the one who's always fighting and being a cheerleader for equity. But my brain went to a place that I felt like I was being biased. And so felt like I was being challenged just by reading the document and not even knowing really what to do with that information. So I encourage all of us today to challenge ourselves, to allow for us to really connect with the information that will be shared with us today. I really feel like a lot of this is about awareness, and Dr. Brathwaite is going to talk very deeply about that, and she is the practitioner of this. And one of the things that I feel strongly about, and it's funny because my president of Amarillo College, and I mentioned this at our last conference, is that he has a way to help people hearts align with the data. And sometimes I guess that it doesn't really matter if the heart has not connected. But what we can't deny is that there is data around this information that Dr. Brathwaite will be sharing with us today. So please welcome Dr. Brathwaite as she shares with us her knowledge and her research around this very challenging information that she will share with us today. Welcome.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you for showing up on your Friday and giving me some of your attention for a little while. Thank you to Janice, Michelle, Keegan, everyone who's kind of got me together and helped me get to this day with you guys, and Christy. So I will start to share my screen and get into these slides. Everyone can see that? Just a head nod. Okay, so I'm coming to you from the Community College Research Center. We're located in Harlem, New York, uptown. We're on the campus of Columbia University, and we've been around for 23, 24 years now, and we focus on issues related to policy and practice for community colleges. So we have areas of research that focus on college readiness and dual enrollment, guided pathways, online education, workforce training, economic returns to higher education. My particular background is in developmental education, and particularly looking at equity gaps and any inequities that result from the assignment to developmental education. Similarly, I also do work on English learners and the inequities that they experience in higher education. We're also moving into another wave of work that is equity related, where we look at how community colleges can be funded more adequately and equitably. So this is where I'm coming from. And we also do a lot of work on internal DEI at CCRC. We're funded by the Gates Foundation to be looking at how we interact as an organization, but also how we can do our research in ways that actually advance equity in the field. How can we provide people like yourselves with information that allows them to make different decisions and make decisions that advance equity? So that's who I am. That's CCRC. Today, our goal is really to increase awareness around issues of equity. So think to get in a frame of mind and to understand what it means to be equity minded, and how being equity minded can improve the experiences of our students. and to empower you all to think about creative solutions and think about how you can, you know, revise your practice, reform your practice in order to advance an equity mission. And also, I just wanted to say, if there's ever a question or anything like that, you can feel free to unmute yourself. I come from an academic background where professors or whoever will just like cut you off mid-statement. So don't feel like you have to wait or, you know, not speak up. I want to make sure that if there are questions or confusions, we're all on the same page and we're moving together and you're tracking with me. So feel free to jump in whenever you feel like it. So we're gonna start with a 7-minute small group icebreaker, which Michelle really should have done the intro for. It's around, how did you feel when you read the ATD equity statement? How do you, you know, anxiety, confusion, like how are we supposed to do this? Why, you know, doubtful, all of those feelings are completely acceptable, because what we're gonna do today is figure out the types of thinking and the ways of seeing things that will help us advance equity. You know, I think it's important to begin though by putting your feelings out there and then getting honest about how you feel about equity and identifying kind of where your hiccups are, because that will make this experience more useful for you. If you can identify like, you know, equity sounds really great to me, but I don't understand what it means. Or equity sounds really great to me, but how am I supposed to do this? I'm already very busy. Like those are real questions and real feelings. So I think it's important to begin there and begin from a space of honesty and like acknowledging your own feelings. So Keegan is going to put you all into small groups. What I want you all to do is assign someone to not take notes, but to come up, you guys come up with a list of 5 words, emotions, or phrases that came up for you, and assign someone to put them in the chat box when we come back together. I see Monica says, this was before, not only should there be equity for students, but equity for our employees. Absolutely, absolutely. Equity is a 360-degree concept. So I'm just monitoring the chat. This is where you drop in your 5 terms that you and your group came up with about kind of what the equity statement surfaced for you and what it made you feel. A lot to unpack. Needed and necessary. Barriers, removing barriers. Sensitive, yes. Easier, yes. Students need support, yeah. Awareness. Inclusive, obligation, success. So I'm glad Kyla's group really started off with the honesty, because I was just telling Michelle this. If there were no people saying like, I'm tired of hearing about this, or I don't understand what this means, or it makes me weary when I hear this word, or if there was nobody saying any of that, I would think you were all being dishonest with me, because it is super uncomfortable to talk about. It's uncomfortable as a person that comes from a marginalized group or groups. It's also uncomfortable, I would imagine, when you don't come from those groups, looking in from the outside. It is an uncomfortable process. And I underscore the word process, that it is not something you're going to get right all the time. You know, we have to be willing to make mistakes with each other and to, you know, give people the benefit of the doubt and assume that we're always trying to learn and always trying to get better, as colleagues, as friends, as frolics, as some people would call it. Empowerment, inclusive, confusing, encompassing, thinking outside the box. Confusing is a good one, because I would agree with that. As someone who does a lot of this work within my organization, it's often like, but do I have the power to actually make this better? Like, sure, I could tell you what's wrong, but how am I supposed to actually do something about it? Or how do I get in touch with the person that does something about it? Does the person that could change it actually care? Like, like confusing is definitely the thing I often feel. Hooray, commitment, yes. Concerned about how to do this, absolutely. Overwhelmed, relieved, dismantle barrier, systemic implementation. These are all really great, and I'm glad that while I expected some negative like apprehension, the comments are overwhelmingly positive. And I think that's where you get that feeling to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, that everyone is here with the same goals in mind for the students. And even if they're not getting it right, you are here to help each other get it right. And you're here to work together and co-create the type of college you want to, the college department, the program that you want to have together, that you guys are here and in this journey together. It's not a us them thing. It's a like, how can we do better for the students? And I'll talk more about what that looks like and that way of thinking in a moment. Everybody see what is equity?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for that. So what is equity? You know, I think, like I said, it's something that we constantly say and it sounds good and it gives us like a small moment that we're doing something right, but what actually does it mean? The Oxford Dictionary defines it as the quality of being fair and impartial. Fair to me, with 3 young nieces, the definition is not that clear of what fair looks like, but impartial, I think we can understand. Impartial is really not treating one person necessarily worse than another, right? Achieving the Dream defines it as ensuring that each student receives what they need to be successful through the intentional design of the college experience. So this brings in another element. Not only is it about not treating anyone particularly worse, but it's actually about meeting students where they are in the educational context in order to make sure that they have success. All students don't start at the same place. How can you meet them where they are? And how can you design their educational experiences to meet them where they are for success? This is a definition, the third bullet is a definition I heard a long time ago, and it just felt so simple. Like, if you had to think about a vision for equity, it would be a situation where outcomes can't be predicted by one's race or socioeconomic group. Right now, if you look at medicine, criminal justice, healthcare, really anything, and you just had the statistics or outcomes without any race attached to it, you could probably guess which group is Black people, which group is Hispanic, you know, because that is the structure that our society has had, and that is the structure that our institutions have produced. A situation of equity is where you can't make those connections anymore. You can't predict someone's outcome based on what race they are, or you can't even look at statistics and think you know who created those statistics or who falls into those groups. So Alicia Dowd and Estella Ben-Simone, I like the way that they conceptualize equity, in that equity can be thought of as a standard. Equity can, when we achieve this state of impartiality and when we are designing we're designing services and offerings to meet students where they are, that's the standard, where no group is not receiving what they need. No group is being treated worse than another. That's like the gold standard, and that's what we're all trying to achieve. How do those definitions feel? Anybody have any reactions to those?
Hi, this is Adrienne with Dallas College. One, I don't like the word fair because I feel like fair is very subjective, right? And so it doesn't give us anywhere to move because there is no clear point of when we have reached an area that represents equity, right? Because it's not a destination, and it's definitely a journey that continues. But the last one, where the one that you even like says that is thought of as a standard, as soon as you said that, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to know, we're going to get access to this PowerPoint, because it's just such a powerful idea that it is a standard that we should set for ourselves, that we're always striving towards. Even if we can't always get there every day or every year, we know that that's our goal. So it's always where we're working towards.
Yeah, I'm going to put together some resources for you guys for sure. I haven't decided yet if I'm sharing these slides, but like I said, I recommended a book to, like I said, I will put together a bunch of resources, but also Michelle is going to be looking into getting you guys some additional resources. So all these definitions and everything may not be in the format of slides, but I will provide you with the things that I have. Thank you for that, Adrian. Any other thoughts? I don't know if can you guys see like the chat and everything on your screen too? I don't want to be blocking anything. Any other responses to these definitions? Any concerns? Okay. So what is equity? Equity is not equality. And I think, even I have to catch myself sometimes because I always want to say inequality, but what we really want is equity. Equity is, equality is giving everyone the same thing. And as we said in the previous direction, everybody doesn't need the same thing. If you see the tall man with the high top on the left, he doesn't need a bench. He can see over the gate fine. He is advantaged height-wise, right? If you see the redhead on the far right, he does need a bench, and he actually needs 2 benches to stand on. Equity is about meeting people where they are. So you see on the right-hand side under equity, the redhead has a tall bench, a taller bench than the middle one, and that's okay because now they can all see over. The goal is to see over this fence. The goal is to complete college. The goal is to be successful in your courses. It doesn't have to be that everyone gets the same exact thing. And that's something that we'll continue to circle back with today. And I think it's probably one of the hardest things to wrap your head around in terms of reform. It somehow, and as much as I don't like it and Adrian doesn't like the word, people often feel like it's unfair. This idea that like, well, why does he get a bigger bench? They're all students, they're all paying tuition, they're all whatever, fill in the blank. Why does he get a bigger bench? And that I think is a valid instinct. But again, the goal is to have everyone looking over the fence, right? So if you're going to have everyone looking over the fence, some people are going to need bigger benches if they're short, and tall people may not need any benches. That's just the way to get everyone over the bench. Perhaps certain groups need more student services than others because maybe they're first generation students, whereas other people can rely on their parents or other social resources to achieve the same goal. That's okay. And those other students deserve the increased student supports. And it's okay that maybe the more advantaged students don't need it. And that's totally fine. But I just wanted to bring in this graphic, which you've probably seen already, but it is a real sticking point, especially when you think about policy and making policies and devoting resources. People really bristle at the idea of like, we're gonna have this for Black students. It's like, wait, why isn't it for every student? It's like, because Black students are doing the worst in this particular aspect, or Native American students, Indigenous students are doing the worst. Whatever the context is, you have to be able to treat people differently sometimes to achieve the same ends. So what is not equity? And that's not grammatically correct, but you get what I'm getting towards here. But focusing on the student instead of the institution. So, I've done a lot of data collection over the years, and it's very easy to get into a mindset of, well, if the students were just motivated, if the students were just work harder, if they did more outside of class, all of those things may or may not be true. But when you think about equity and meeting students where they are, it's about what the institution can do to meet them where they are, not about what the deficits of the student are. And that's the second bullet, thinking about students from a deficit perspective. Like I said, most of my research has focused on DevEd, developmental education, on the credit side. And DevEd in itself is really just framed from a deficit perspective. It's kind of assuming that because a student didn't pass a given test on a given day when they got to college, they are therefore unprepared to do college level work, and that they must spend any number of semesters in pre-curriculum courses that they have to pay for to be able to enroll in college classes. So you'll start to see, like in California with the AB 705 initiative, they've outlawed DevEd to a large extent. Now you have to, instead of a deficit framing, assuming students aren't ready, now with AB 705 in California, you have to prove that that student would be better served in DevEd, which is very hard to do. So all students must be placed into college level courses with support unless you can prove that they really need DevEd. That's an asset-based perspective, that these students are capable, they're intelligent, and with support, they can achieve college level work rather than because they got this score on this test, they're not ready and they can't do college level work. That's the difference here. And we want to think of students as valuable and bringing assets to the campus.
Dr. Brathwaite?
Yes.
There is a question in the chat. Do you want me to just wait until you ask for questions, or is it fine for me to come in?
Yeah, sure. I can, are we talking about Chris's question?
Yes, yes.
What is the need for someone to find success? Do you want to expand on that, Chris? I'm not sure that I understand.
Yeah, I was simply thinking the reason we think of equity, because we want to identify what that person needs. What do they need in order to be successful?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I like to do when I'm working with students. What do you need?
Mm-hmm.
So
It's about meeting students where they are, not setting a bar and then sitting back and seeing if students can meet it. And
yeah.
You're absolutely right. What do students need? That's the idea of, culturally responsive work, student supports that are holistic. All students don't need the same thing. Some students may need food. They don't have enough food. They're hungry. Some students may need childcare. They can't focus because they have kids that need taken care of. All students don't need the same thing. Some students may need a teacher. Some students may just need more time on their test. Like whatever it is, all students don't need the same things, but there are things that can be given to them at the institutional level that can help them be successful. So thank you, Chris. Mandating equality is the last thing, and I already discussed this, so I won't stay on it too long, but this idea that everyone has to have the same thing and that everyone needs to be given the same thing. And we are not okay with creating policies for specific groups, targeted support. That's not equity. And that's not going to lead to equity because it's just going to reinforce existing inequalities. If you give all three of those people in that diagram the same bench, that's not equity. All those people still can't see over the gate. So I've touched on this, but the definition of equity is context dependent, and it requires a great deal of intentionality. You have to be thoughtful going into this. What we choose to look at is a decision. Where we choose to examine, where we choose to look for problems, what rocks we pick up to look under are all choices. And you have to be intentional about looking at how privilege and disadvantage operate in society. It may not be evident to you why certain kids don't show up every day. It may not be, you might just assume you have the answer, right? But you need to be intentional about looking for those areas of inequality, of disadvantage, of, just problems that students are having, obstacles that they're experiencing. There has to be a step where you say, I don't have the answer here. Like, where can I look? What can I do to better understand what's going on here? I see that these students are failing my course all the time, or I see that these students can't be successful in this program, or haven't been successful, I should say, in this program. I see that we don't have many, Indigenous people in this program. That is something that you have to interrogate, and something you have to actually be intentional about looking at the data to see who you have first off, and then thinking about it and collecting data to understand why. And I just want to underscore that equity isn't a natural process. So for all of you who said this makes you tired, that it seems like a lot of work, that it makes you you're not sure about how to do it. It's not something that comes natural to us. It's not something that we wake up always thinking about. Like, I really just love Michelle's story in the beginning about not thinking about undocumented people, because that is not her everyday experience. So she would have to, this is why equity requires intentionality. If we all went off of our own biases to look for things and to see what problems we want to address, I'd probably address issues of Black women more often than not, because that's what I know and that's what I would look for, right? So we all have to be intentional about looking at equity and looking for issues of inequity. So equity-minded change, this is kind of the mindset, I would call it, I guess, of doing this work and trying to make things more equitable. So I really like this statement from Estella, some of the work at Q. I'm not sure if it's exactly Estella Ben-Simone, but the eradication of racial inequality in higher education outcomes requires equity-minded practitioners. If we are to get to a state of impartiality where people's outcomes are not determined by their social group, every practitioner that works with students is going to have to be equity-minded. What is equity-minded? Being race conscious. And this is obviously about race, but it goes for whatever marginalized subgroup is relevant in your context. Like I said, equity is context dependent, and you have to be intentional about looking for where inequities are. And this really goes for everything, but being conscious about inequities, as opposed to thinking that everything is sweet because you don't see it, or everything is not racialized. Sorry if you guys hear that plane, but as opposed to being colorblind, looking at race and looking for racial inequities and being conscious of that. Being cognizant of structural and institutional racism, acknowledging that systems are not set up. So higher education institutions were not necessarily created for the students that they currently serve. Higher education very much functions in a traditional age, white, middle class. That's the target, and that's been the target for a very long time. So you have to be willing to realize that everything that's in place, every policy, every practice that's in place may not be a good policy or practice. It may be born of good intention. It's like Devet, it may be born of good intention, but if its impact is inequitable, you have to be willing to interrogate that policy and practice. Recognizing that to achieve equity, it may be necessary to treat individuals unequally. We already talked about that. And being able to focus on practices as the source of failure rather than students. And we talked about that as well. So changing your practice in service of equity. So, right, thus far we've talked kind of about these concepts of equity and like definitions and things that are not necessarily grounded in what we do every day. But the reason why we're here with this peer mentor network is to change our practice ultimately, right? To change how we do things. And this is something I'm grappling with as a researcher. So that's why I say we, even though I'm not a practitioner, thinking about how I can do things differently to create more equitable outcomes. How is what I'm doing working? How is it not working? So to achieve the mission and goals of public education generally, in your institution specifically, and to your own personal self, whatever your goals may be as a professional, you have to pay attention to inequitable outcomes and have a sense of urgency around resolving them. The two go together, paying attention and being cognizant and being equity-minded, but also doing something about it, right? Changing, actually making changes and going towards striving for change. So in the book that I recommended, Dr. Tia Brown McNair and Estella and another author discuss engaged inclusivity, which I think is a really good practice in that it transforms the discussion from general acceptance and tolerance, saying, we have a lot of Black students here, or we have a lot of single moms in this college, and we try to be nice to them, or like we try to be as accommodating as we can, or things like that, to a much more active position. We have a lot of single moms here. What can we do to support them? Like Chris said, what do they need to be successful? There's a passive and an active way, And engaged inclusivity is about making that shift, not just passively observing these differences and saying like, oh, we're happy you're here. More so, we see you and we want to meet you where you are and we want to do better by you. Those are two different things and they're going to have two different impacts. Lastly, change starts on the individual level. People drive change, lead change, and sustain change. So one of the things I struggled with, which I already mentioned, is feeling like you don't have enough power to really create change, or feeling like enough people aren't on board to create change. But you can create change in every conversation you have with a student, in every course you teach, in every email you send, every Zoom you sign into, everything, every email you send to your colleague, every email you send to your boss, you can be creating change. So the other shift that has to happen is from being passive to active about your own power and about what you can actually achieve and accomplish. So any questions? I feel like I'm throwing a lot at you. Any questions?
Hi, this is Monica Stansberry with Dallas College.
Hi, I've been.
You said you've been to?
I usually go to Richland College every year to give a talk, but we couldn't go. I couldn't go this year. I would usually in October.
No, and we had a group from your area come down to do they did a research project with us.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so that's something different. I'll talk to you about that later. But I wanted to say, speaking as a DevEd practitioner, that adult ed can have the same repercussions as dev ed if we do not work with students where they are and move them forward. And many dev ed programs, they take a look at individual skill levels rather than looking at the students as a whole. Some programs like San Jacinto, they built wraparound services for those students, which is what Texas really does for adult ed programs, looking at the student holistically rather than what is it that they're missing, especially when students have so much value in their own lives and they bring to us their value and their impact. Mm-hmm. But we have to continue our work in adult ed and make sure that we have real impact with accelerating them, giving them opportunities for stackable credentials. And I fear that if we don't, you can still have the same type of things where students will circle in adult ed because they feel comfortable there. And so we have to let them know that, yes, we are your springboard, but you have to move on.
Yep. Fly. Teach them how to, develop their wings and let them fly. Push them even to fly. Yes, I completely agree. Thank you for that. Anybody else have any thoughts or contributions here?
No. I love Monica's statement, just because that is a very common thing to see. Like a GED student will sometimes be in a program for years, and it's disappointing to see that. And you're always like, well, what's happening? What's going on? When we now have things like ability to benefit, which is another form of financial aid, that you could have at least had the student working on a stackable credential versus just only doing their GED program. So yeah, you see that a lot. And then also I think I can speak to even ESL, sometimes holding them back to some degree and continuously saying, no, they're not ready to move up. No, they're not ready. And holding them back. So yes, it can be, Monica, I just love what you say. You can see very easily how adult education can resemble dev ed, where students, they call it, people come to die in dev ed here at my institution. That's what that used to be the thing that they would say. And I have a very strong vice president who is always looking at adult education. And she says to me all the time, do not let adult ed mimic developmental education. Do not let adult ed students sit up here and stay in adult ed for years and years. I mean, she stays on top of that, making that a statement, a bold statement, because it's exactly what Monica said. They can resemble each other easily.
I love that. I was talking to a community college grad of one of my closest friends, and I said, "What do you think about community colleges?" I mean, I've been doing this for 7 years. I don't know what made me ask that question. And he said, because he went to a community college, he said, it feels like a grade 13 almost. It feels like I'm not going anywhere, or like I wasn't doing anything. And I think that feeling of just a continuation of high school, which is very comfortable, but not necessarily connecting you to your goals, is a real one. So, kudos to your dean and your vice president, and, for just calling that out for what it is. It took us 10, 15 years to get to that point with dev ed. So maybe it won't take as long with adult ed, to make sure that we're accelerating students. So that's really exciting. I see Denise in the comments. Along with equity, we should be looking at outcomes. The idea is not to make students dependent on us to be successful. Yeah, we're going to get to outcomes soon. So let me share my screen again in case unless you guys have anything else to say. So equity is a process that includes identification of problems, creation of solutions, and work towards sustainability. So institutions need to calculate the disproportionate impact on educational outcomes. Like I said, you have to be intentional about looking across that landscape and seeing who's falling behind, which groups are not doing well, and being intentional about that, not just using hearsay or not just who you see in your classes, but like calculating and really relying on some type of systematic collection of data. And I'm not talking about creating some fancy surveys or doing anything necessarily high level. I'm talking more about being systematic and looking at the multiple potential areas that inequities can exist. It's not just race, it's not just socioeconomic status. It can be ability. There are many ways that people can be unequal. You have to keep a lens of looking for what that may be. So there's identification of the problem, looking at the data, understanding, keeping a frame of inquiry in your mind about what that might be. There's solutions. After you identify the groups that are behind or that need more support, what are you going to do about it? Institutions have to develop and they have to develop goals. So I see that this student is behind. What is the vision for them? What do I think this college can do for these students, and how can we do it? There needs to be some visioning, and then there needs to be strategizing on how to achieve that vision. What does equity look like at your college? Where we go back to that definition of, your outcomes are not predicted by your category. It might be that equity looks like Indigenous students are graduating at the same rate as white and Asian students. But you have to identify that first. And there's something important about putting things down on paper and seeing things and really interrogating a problem and then acting on it, which we'll talk about in a little bit also. And then there's sustainability. You've worked in community colleges, and I'm sure that there's a new initiative, at least annually. There's new things popping up all the time. Everyone's trying something new. How are we creating solutions, but also how are we thinking about sustaining them long term? When this grant runs out, how are we going to keep doing this work? If this dean was to leave, how are we going to keep doing this work? If our funding changes or the state cuts our budget, what are we going to do? If a pandemic breaks out, how are we going to continue to do this work? There are considerations that increase efficiency. Everybody is working double time. Everybody is doing a lot. As you think about solutions, you have to think about how to sustain them so that in 3 years' time, you're not starting from scratch. So a little bit about data. Data are important, not only for what problems they reveal, but also because the social process of making meaning of data is a powerful catalyst. And that's why I love this book by Tia McNair, not the one cited, but there's another book about where she has they have many chapters about how to use the data, like the process of inquiry, the process of sitting with a team, your team, and actually going through the numbers and saying, like, what do you see here? What do you think this is about? That in and of itself is part of the equity process. That's important. It's not something that two people should be sitting in a room doing. It's not something that you do in the IR office and they tell you what the numbers are saying. It's important for you to sit down and think about what you're seeing, both with your eyes and in the numbers. Like, think about the experiences and really that's how you develop solutions that are actually rooted in the problem that they're trying to solve. Looking at the data, getting in touch with the data, understanding what that looks like. And data can be a survey that you put out online at the end of your classes. It can be IR data and institutional research data. It can be state data. There's publicly available data collected by the federal government. There's tons of different things that you can look at. It can be you convene a group of 20 students and you take 5 at a time and do some interviews with them. Like, it can be anything, but there has to be a step where you pause and say, I need to figure out what's going on. So disaggregating data is important. Disaggregating data meaning making sure that you have outcomes for Black, white, Asian, Latino students, or whatever group it is that you need to focus on. It's important, but it's not the end product. In the wake of No Child Left Behind and high stakes accountability, there was a big push to disaggregate data. Everything, the federal government, everything had to be disaggregated, which is great, but it's not the end goal. And a lot of times, particularly in research, sad to say, people feel as though if they can just state the inequality or show it or identify it, that they're like on their way to equity. And they are, but there's a lot more to come after that. Disaggregating data on its own is just a tool. Understanding the differences by race, by gender, by whatever it is the beginning of the process. Then you move on from there. It's not enough to just, we're doing great. We know about all our students. We disaggregate all of our data. Great, but what did you do about it? What did you do about the gaps that you saw? Did you guys sit down and talk about it? Did you devise solutions based on those gaps? So I'm gonna move into problem identification because this is where we're gonna stay for the rest of today in preparation for the next time we come together, which is next year. It seems so far away. But so I really like this concept of double loop learning. Organizational change that is enduring requires double loop learning. It's basically not assuming that you have the answers and taking this time, like I keep saying, to make sure that the problem is fully understood, that the institutional actors have the knowledge that the problem exists and acknowledge that the institutional actors know that a problem exists, but admit or acknowledge that the reasons for that problem are not yet known. I think there's a inclination to go off of what you think you know, or anecdotes, or what have you, and say like, okay, these students are not showing up. I know what that's about. But like I said, there's value in sitting down and really thinking through why this problem is happening. It will help you craft a stronger solution and a sustainable solution if you actually take the time to loop back and say, like, is this what I think it is? I might have a hypothesis, but I need to consult the data and come back and say, is my hypothesis correct? Is what I'm thinking is the problem actually the problem? I need to go talk to some students to see. I think that this is what's keeping our single moms from being successful. You, single moms in my focus group. Is this the case? Is this what you're struggling with? Yes, no? Do you think that this solution will be helpful to you? There's that circling back and not assuming that we have the answers. That's an important step here. So Keegan is going to put you into small groups to do just this. Start to think about what the inequities are at your college. He's going to put you in groups with people from your college. And for those of you who are representing your college by yourself, he's going to put you guys into a group and you can talk across colleges, but and I'll put these questions in the chat. What institutional practices are supporting student groups? That doesn't make sense. What institutional, I'll put a actually like correct version of that question in the chat, but what practices are inadvertently contributing to or failing to address inequities? How are the way you do things at your college contributing to inequities? What inequities do you see, first of all? And then what do you think is causing that? Like, just brainstorming. This is not anything that, is final. It's really to start generating ideas and to give yourself space. Like I said, we tend to think we have the answers and we tend to move quickly because we're busy. But this is an opportunity, provided by the Peer Mentor Network, to sit and think and really contemplate what's happening at my college. What am I seeing that I don't like? What am I seeing that's not helping students? And how can we better meet them where they are? And we're going to spend all of the next time we meet talking about solutions and how to create them. So for today, don't feel compelled to go too far. It would be perfectly fine if when we got back together, all you've done is list the things that are not right. That's totally fine for today, because your homework will be to interrogate that further. So you guys are going to go off into your groups. I'm going to put the questions in the chat and just assign someone to share out. So we're going to go around to each group afterwards, and you're going to talk about you don't have to, if you don't want to, you don't have to name the specific thing or problem. You don't have to tell your college's business, but talk about kind of the way you thought about this and the way it made you feel, or anything that you do want to share out. I'm not here to, have you guys blast your colleges, but do you see practices and policies that could be changed? Do you have a way of looking at inequities? Do you feel like I have no idea where the inequities are? Those are the types of things you want to start thinking about. Any volunteers where you had a particularly captivating conversation or anything that came up? I am taking notes, and obviously this is recorded, but I am listening in a way that I hope to use this information for our next get together, so that we can, not lose too much ground. Unfortunately, it's all the way in February. So, we want to keep as much momentum as we can, and I will give you guys some resources and homework to keep momentum going. But yeah, give it to me. I want to hear what you guys talked about. Any volunteers?
I will not take up time because I know I can.
That's cool.
All of it. So one of the things that we talked about in our group was technology. And so, now because we have COVID and all these things are going on, and even probably before COVID, people needed tech. I'm sure it just seems to be emphasized because of COVID. So students not having access to technology in order to even do their classwork. That is a place that I say to myself, how do you financially take on that responsibility? So that one for me is, how do you do that? Because that's the one I know students need it. There's no doubt. I think many of us agree that this is an area we would love to be able to assist and help, but how do you do that financially?
Thank you, Michelle. Technology issues are widespread. What else?
I know one of the things in our group that we talked about was the lack of lower level curriculum.
Say floor, F-L-O-O-R?
No, lower, L-O-W. Uh-huh.
Ah, interesting. Meaning like there's not enough courses. I know this comes up in ESL work, but some colleges don't offer like the lowest levels of ESL.
Right. Yeah, or even if you have that level of student within a regular HSC class, because they oftentimes get left behind, not in lack of better terms, because you can't always make it equal throughout the entire classroom.
Mm-hmm. How do you target your kind of least prepared student, and what do they need to be successful?
Right. And that even goes into the support classes for the college developmental classes. You know, how do we manage to keep their interest and keep them going and becoming successful to go on into college?
That's a very big question now as you know, acceleration strategies are ramping up and CORAC and things like that. You know, that basic extra hour may not cut it for everyone.
Right.
Doesn't mean we should go back to Dev Ed, but what else is needed, or what's needed in a STEM pathway, for example, as a support. But yeah, thank you for that, Kelly. I have a comment here. You talked about curriculum. Oh, this is a private comment. Sorry, let me make sure it's private. Okay, I'll read that. At another time. But anybody else?
Well, I'm going to piggyback off what Michelle and Kelly said, and one of the challenges that we face specifically, what we discussed, and I do think Denise should engage in the conversation because she's got a good point of view on it. But one thing that it prompted me to remember was the divide between our digital immigrants and our digital natives is something that we saw greatly impacted us. And although it was just at our if we in the context of our program, if you apply that to a greater population within our institution, even the educators themselves were struggling with that. And so I think that's something that has to be addressed.
Yep. What you're saying resonates with so much of the work that we're doing, but I won't tell you a story for each point for the sake of time.
Our group also talked about the difficulties with access to technology. And Michelle asked, you know, so how do we afford the funds to deal with a problem like that? And our group, and it wasn't me, but a couple of other members of the group were talking about efforts on their part to reach out to local businesses so that students could actually go to the businesses and access the internet because there was a tower nearby. Another thing that our local libraries are renting are loaning hotspots. And so if we sort of know about these resources within the community, rather than having to create all the resources ourselves, effective outreach into the community with good messaging, you know, would allow us to give the students access to some of this stuff they wouldn't otherwise. And actually, Adrienne said something really nice as well. She was saying, you know, that businesses like to see themselves as being helpful in this way. So, you know, let the businesses give back.
Yeah,
frame it that way.
Great. One of the things, since Amarillo College, we are trying, and one of the things we did, we put hotspots in certain locations for students to go be able to access the internet, because maybe they had their own, you know, laptop but didn't have access to a Wi-Fi. And one of our group members made a comment, but really people want to be in the comfort of their own home. And so how do we still yet get them the things that they need to have this available to them at home? And then here I go again, my brain starts to think, I'm like, well, isn't that like, oh gosh, I don't want to be the one who's the bad guy, so y'all do not be judging me, but I am in my brain, I'm saying to myself, if we provide access to some degree, is that, I'm not saying enough, but I understand you want to be at home in your house. I get that. There's nothing more, that's wonderful. But if we are trying to be fiscally responsible and we are trying our very best to at least provide access to some degree, I don't know if the word is, when do you say, okay, you're doing enough? Or do you say, I don't know how to.
Michelle, I'm a really big talker, and so I also try to resist, but I'm gonna do this very quickly because I thought of it when Monica was speaking, and I'm gonna say something that was very memorable to me at our college when we were coming and talking about pulling in underrepresented populations is that we sat at a table and I had people at my table, employed at my college, that told me a big part of the problem were programs like mine, because we were creating people who were dependent on handouts. I'll never forget that. Because the whole idea was, well, as long as you're giving them, they need to come here prepared. And so what I'm going to kind of leave you with, because I think what you're saying and what Monica said and the way I felt when that happened was, I'm opening the door. And that's what I told them. If nobody ever helped you, congratulations to you. However, I'm not the gatekeeper. I have a key and I hand it to them and I get them in. Whether they stay in the building or not, that's on them. And I make sure they understand it, because there's never going to be total agreement on what's enough and what's too much. But so I'm throwing that out there.
I like I know that there's stats out there about people who get a free programs. And so there's information on if you have a free program, people are less likely to sign up than if they have to invest. Houston does a really good thing. I think they have students have to pay like $20. And it's like, for $20, change your life.
Right.
Do you have information, Jessica, on more stats on free programming versus programming that is scholarshiped or contract, or because I do think when we sell it, when we feel like we're going around begging for students or, please come join our program, rather than here's an opportunity, here's a scholarship for you. I think that makes a difference, but that's just anecdotal and past stats that I've read, prior to this decade. If you have any updates on that type of data, that I would love to be able to use that when I'm talking to, TWC and when I'm talking to administrators in higher ed.
I probably have the same old stats you have. Time seems to fly, but I know that in terms of like Pell Grants and different scholarships, there was this idea that having some type of skin in the game, be it a nominal amount, did have a better impact than just getting something for free. Something that comes to mind is the CUNY START program, which is something I've studied in partnership with MDRC, which is a pre-curriculum program, pre-matriculation program, and students can become college ready in all 3 subjects in 1 semester. It's heavily funded by the central office and everything, but students are required to pay $75. They can save their financial aid, they don't have to pay tuition, but they do have to pay $75. There's plenty of precedents set already for charging a nominal amount, not an access restricting amount, but charging a nominal amount for fees in order to have some type of buy-in from the student. And that uptake is faster, but maybe not sustained without such buy-in. I don't have any resources off the top of my head except the ones around tuition funding, but I think there are programs out there that do charge a nominal rate, $20, $50, less than $100 for things that obviously cost much more and have to be subsidized, but in order to make it an investment on their part.
Something that comes up for me when I'm listening to everybody speak, to Michelle's point, I think that the 52 of us in this room have hearts big enough to solve all the world's problems, but we have resources that only allow us to reach a certain number of students. And to me, really, it's a deeper issue that we really need to be generating a culture at our institutions where we're encouraging our staff and our students to get comfortable with seeking out opportunities and situations that provide cognitive dissonance as we move forward. That seems to be the biggest thing, because people who say, well, your program's free, or you're giving away resources and you're generating a certain kind of community that just expects things for free and lives off that. That tells me in our fight for equity, our common enemy is often the blind spots. which are just next to impossible for us to discern on our own if we don't constantly seek out opportunities that provide that cognitive dissonance in what we understand. Because I know that coming from a middle class, a white family, and I'm male, until I joined this team, I didn't realize the depth of the blind spots that I hold. And my team has been gracious and kind to help me work through some of those, and I still have a lot of I have a lot of room to grow. I will forever have room to grow. But without them providing those opportunities and those situations that begin to tell me what I think is wrong, and it starts to create that cognitive dissonance, kind of like when I'm giving up smoking and I know that smoking's wrong, but I continue to smoke anyway. It's that, well, if I'm treating people a certain way because I've always done it, and it was taught to me that this is how we treat people, I need those situations that begin to tell me something's not right. And it seems like that while the 51 of us only have a certain amount of money to provide resources like Wi-Fi and technology, we have an unlimited supply of opportunities to begin to create that culture where we help people get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
I should have asked you to do my closeout, Keegan. That's
sorry about that.
That's pretty much, I agree, great comments. That's pretty much where we, are gonna leave it today. We have space for another comment or two, but generally we're starting to get into the feeling of being uncomfortable, starting to get comfortable with the fact that we're not doing everything right, that we're doing a lot of things right, and our heart is in the right place, but that some of the impacts may not be what we want, that we might have to do things differently, that we might have to call ourselves out. It might not even be calling somebody out or calling your colleague out, which may be better. It might be calling yourself out. And we have to start getting ready and comfortable for that. We'll do that more between now and the next time we speak. Let me just see what is in my final recap slides, if there's anything worth really bringing up the slides. No, basically that next time we're gonna really zoom in on our target populations, what the gaps are, and what our vision for equity is. And writing that out in detail, like I said, is a very important step. Setting clear and measurable goals. Some of you have probably told your students about SMART goals. The same thing applies to equity. We need to be able to measure it. We need to be able to, this is a process, and it takes intentional work. It is not just something that if your heart is in the right place, it just happens. It's a process, and it takes work, and you have to set goals and define what the problem is very specifically in order to achieve your goals. So the homework is the problems that you identified in your groups. Where can you go to get more information on those problems? Who can you talk to? What data can you get? Get it if you can between now and then. I know the holidays are coming up, but we won't speak again unless it's by email until February. So between now and then, you should be able to get your hands on some more intel. I've had this hunch about technology at my college. Like, I'm not gonna remember your name, but I like the idea of let's get clear on what resources we have available to us. You think there's a technology shortage, there may be a whole office on the other side of campus with all these computers or all this technology that you have no idea about. Start putting out some feelers, start trying to get, information on these inequities that you've identified. Read the book, read whatever articles I put together to send out. And the last thing is have conversations with people at your college. I'm not trying to get you to evangelize anyone just yet, but have conversations, see what they think about these inequities you've thought about, see what they see as the issue, see what they how they respond to it, see you start to see oh, that topic really rubs some people the wrong way, or they don't see that as a problem. It's obviously a problem, those types of things. So have some conversations, get some data, start to really interrogate and have that mindset of inquiry about the problems that are facing students first, and then try to get some data to really create that double loop where you admit, I don't have it figured out, but I'm gonna do what it takes to like circle back and see if what I think is the problem is actually the problem. And I'm gonna try to support that with some data, because that's what makes it measurable. That's what 2 years from now, you can look back and say, that data has changed, things have changed. How would you ever know if things have changed if you don't measure it? So I will leave you guys with that. I've already taken up a minute of your Friday afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me into this space. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for your comments and your participation. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.